Hello, my name is John Emigh. I'm a theater director and scholar and performer from the United States, and I have a long-standing interest in the performing arts of India and in particular of Odisha. The work in Asia actually began with a year-long visit to Bali, Indonesia. And I was there studying with an extraordinary dancer named Inyoman Kakul. And I stayed in Kakul's house. I studied with him every day. I learned something called topeng dance, which is a mass dance of Bali. And Bali is a Hindu country. It's its own version of Hinduism. And in trying to trace the origins of the Balinese performance and what gives it shape, it was clear that India was one of the very important sources. In the 1930s, Nehru looked to Bali as a container of a more pure Hinduism. The Indian influence on Bali for a long time pretty much was frozen at the 12th century, and so it's Shaivism mixed with Buddhism, and was very interesting to Indians trying to overcome the legacy of the Indian Raj. I got a chance a few years later to visit India. I visited first Kerala and saw Kathakali. I was in Madras visiting a friend, and I heard about a conference that was taking place in Bhubaneswar. I went to Bhubaneswar, I went to the conference. I talked a little bit at the conference about Bali and some of the remarkable similarities I was seeing between Odisha and Bali. The use of ikat and even double ikat is very rare and is shared by the two places. The diet is similar. The modes of performance that I was beginning to see were somewhat similar. So at the conference, I met a remarkable scholar and performer from Odisha named Dhiren Dash. And Dhiren Dash had written a play called Bali Jatra, and the play had been performed on a very large festival stage format. And he was interested in what I had to say. I was taken by him, by his personality, by his energy, enthusiasm, and by his own knowledge about the maritime trade and the role that Southeast Asia had in it. And he told me at that time if I was ever able to get back to Odisha, he would show me one of the great performing traditions of the world that nobody knew about. And that was the Prahallada Nataka. About a year later, I came back to India. I came with the anthropologist William Beeman and an ethnomusicologist named Amy Catlin. And we were trying to find a subject for documentary film in India. We went to Kashmir and saw the Bhanpatra there. We went to Rajasthan and saw the related Baharupya tradition practiced by caste Hindu Bans. We went to Purulia and Seraikela and looked at the remarkable mask dances that are held there. And then we finally got to Odisha. And Dhiren Dash, true to his word, took us down to Bolgaon and showed us this remarkable performance of the Prahallada Nataka as put together by Raghunath Satapathy. I was bowled over. It was full of energy, daring, endurance, vitality. The audience was clearly with it. The use of the space was theatrically alive. And of course, it ends with the furious entrance of Narasimha in an altered state of consciousness, which also very much interested me, in part because one sees very similar things take place within the Barang Rangda traditions of Bali. And so once again, I was seeing this very close connection between the two cultures. We were able to come back, my wife and I, my wife Uli and I, in 1982-83 and spent a full year in India. And we spent that time moving up and down the eastern coast of India. We went all the way down to Melattur in Tamil Nadu and all the way up to the border of Bangladesh, and saw the Gambhira performances up there, and did film footage from the Chhau performances of Purulia and Seraikela, but spent most of our time, our home base was in Ganjam, and we saw perhaps a dozen performances of Prahallada Nataka there. We also were going out to Rajasthan, and during the rainy months in particular, we made a documentary film about Rupia there named Hajari Bhand. And that was fun. That was a wonderful secular form that has a blend of Islamic and Hindu influences. The work on the Prahallada Nataka was more demanding. It's physically demanding because of the need to stay up all night all the time, but also very demanding because of its devotional intensity. And as we got to know the gurus themselves and their devotion to the form, in particular, as we received the help of Bishop Bihari Kadanga, who facilitated our movement around among the villages, I became extraordinarily impressed by their devotion, their intensity, their perseverance in a situation which often gave them very few material rewards, and to the attention that the audience was giving to this form. As I later learned, it had developed first in the palaces and then had been taken by a professional troupe into the courts and towns of Ganjam and of Srikakulam. But by the time we got to see it, it was well located in the villages, often done by competing troops, and was clearly focused on the domestic troubles of this play. It's a nightmare scenario. A father is demanding his son's obedience. The son resists. He is devoted to Hari. His father is a demon and sees Hari as his greatest enemy. And the upshot is that the father tries to silence and then kill the son. And this goes on all night. And the mother is caught in between and is desperately trying to make peace in the family and make the son reason and behave. The father try to make the father more lenient towards his son, understanding of his son. And it struck me that what was happening here, as I saw wives look over at their husbands or fathers sitting there with their children in their lap, this nightmare version of the stresses in family life was striking a chord in terms of social dramas, and clearly had the audience's rapt attention. The project has continued. Dhiren Dash was able to come to America on a grant from the Asian Cultural Council. And he stayed in our home. He also saw performances all over the country. He went to North Dakota to see festival performances there. He went up to see the Bread and Puppet Theater in Vermont and the wonderful outdoor work they do. He went to visit people who were working in America from India, including Bijoy Mishra. But we, for a long time, just sat at a table and we translated the core text of the Prahallada Nataka as it was deposited in a library in Madras in 1922 and then reprinted in 1973 by the Odisha state government. We got a full translation of that done, and we're working. We also had obtained from the Nalabanta troupe a copy of their guru's book. And that had many other songs and some passages that were not in the Madras text. And we wanted very much to include them because they were part of the whole tradition, and to make the text available. Not that all the text was being done now, but the passages that it had gone through historically and the kind of reservoir of knowledge and of potential textual material to be used within the tradition seemed worthy of reproducing. Dhiren Dash tragically died 2 years later. And so that work remains unfinished. I'm back in India now, working with Pratik Patnaik and trying to get the unfinished work of that text completed. Bishwa Bihari Kadanga was recommended to me as someone I needed to talk to by Dinanath Pati. They had been classmates, and he talked about Bishwa Bihari as someone who knew the entire Prahallada Nataka by heart, which I'm sure is true. He worked as a musical consultant and advisor to several troupes, but he was of extraordinary help to us in connecting us to some of the outstanding troupes, of explaining to us some of the issues involved in performance. And he was a person of great passion and extraordinary energy and commitment. And it was a joy just to be around him. I know, has written a memoir and speaks about his English being imperfect, but he was a very good communicator. I had no problem understanding what he was trying to tell us. And he wasn't always with us. We did a lot of the travel on our own. We met other people along the way. Ganesham Das, Durga Das, for example, Durga Ganesham Das, I should say, was someone who told us a lot of the early history of his family's relationship to the court in Jalandhara, and the spread of the text from out of the court into first the professional troupe of the Durgadas family before it reached the villages. The Durgadas family told me a good bit of their history in relationship to their coming into possession of the script, of copying down the script and sending it back. But the person who made it all came to life is P. Gangadhara, who was himself a student of Durga Bengali Das, one of the next generation of the Durga Das family. He's a man with a wonderful sense of humor and a great way of telling stories. It is P. Gangadhara who told me the wonderful story of having the castmates, the fishermen of Ichapur, bring their fish down to the Raj Guru of Jalandhara and just present it at his feet time and time again until the Raj Guru had to demand, "What is it you want?" And they responded, "We want the book." And so they were given the book, and they copied it down. Dambara Durgadas was the one who adapted it, and so it became famous and became performed with Ms. Amandar's eventual blessing as far away as Rajasthan and Rangoon before being taken to the villages. We were told that the original Prahallada lived in the village of Ichapur. That seemed unlikely. But nonetheless, we went to the place where we had been told, and there sat an ancient man. He was 103 years old. He was thin, and he had this wonderful beatific smile on his face. and we had no interpreter. We looked all around Ichapuram to find someone who knew a little bit of English. We found no one. And so we sat there with him. We sat there at least an hour with this man, with him just smiling and being graceful and wondering what in the world we were doing there, but being welcoming to us nonetheless. Kiramani Das was, it turns out, one of the original Prahladas, one of the boys that originally played Prahlada in the Durgadas company of professional dancers that, according to some, stole the script from the Zamindar of Jalandhara. The company was demanded by the Zamindar to come and perform for him. They did. They performed, and he saw their performance. He, of course, saw that they were much better than the palace performers. And so he, in the end, welcomed their performance. They were, after all, singing his signature lines. And in the village of Mundala, it is said that he sometimes came down there and performed with the company. Kiramani Das would have been performing Prahlada with him. And then by an odd quirk of fate, at the end of his life in 1905, his estate, his Zamindar's estate, his zamindari in Jalandhara, was sold out from under him. He had been tricked by courtiers that were bribed not to be aware of the fact that his estate was being sold. And so he had nowhere to live. And he went to the home of the Durgadas family of Kandra performers and spent his last days lodging with them in their compound. It reached the villages in large part because of the work of Vishwabihari Kadanga's grandfather, Krishna Kadanga, a wealthy timber merchant, a timber merchant of some means, who saw a performance of the Durgadas professional troupe in Parlakamundi and was extraordinarily taken with the form, decided it's just what the villages needed, and he took the remarkable step of making himself the Sisya to Durga Giriwar Das, who was playing Hiranyakashipu in the professional troupe, and brought him up to first Balipada, and then finally Purampur and Nalavanta, where the play took hold and where it's still regularly performed. Other members of the Durgadas troupe then became gurus to the troops that were forming in the villages, and the staging of this play became not only a devotional activity, but it also a way for the villages to compete with each other. And it's a competition of skill and virtuosity and musical integrity, but it's also a competition of knowledge. And that was a remarkable thing to see happening in these villages. The first production we saw, the one that was directed by Rakanath Satpathy, one thing that I saw there that I've never seen since is the placement of Hiranyakashipu on a wonderful made-up elephant, a mocked-up elephant, and him being brought into the space from a distance away by the Dwari, and people clearing the path of the audience for the elephant to get through with him mounted upon it. It was a magnificent entrance. Raghunath Satapathy, of course, is a fine, fine singer, and it was just a treat to see the performances. The dandas have changed. I have not that conversant with all the recent practices, but one of the moments I remember was in a body competition. I don't know how common that is anymore, but two troupes were competing. One, I believe, from Hugulapata, the other from Nalabanta, if I have it right. And the Hugulapata troupe, in one of the dandas, one of the punishments is an attempt to destroy Prahlada by fire. And they placed him on a huge wheel, wagon wheel. And they had bits of fire, they had fire coming out of the spokes of the wheel. And they turned the wheel, and that was very impressive. But then countering this, the Nalabanta troupe had set up this cage and had set up, I think, magnesium, I'm not certain, but they lit the fuses of magnesium, if that's what it was, and created this intense white burning light around Prahlada as he sang about his rescue from this danda. And you know, just the ingenuity, the way in which this competition was taking place by one troupe trying to outdo the other in their devotion, in their knowledge, but also in their just theatrical savvy was very impressive to me. One of the dandas involves the bringing in of snakes by a snake charmer. It's sometimes done using rubber snakes. It's sometimes done with defanged snakes or snakes with poison that has been drained from them. We did see one performance where, tragically, a very strong man was mishandling the snake, and the snake bit him. We left the performance, we went to see if we could get a doctor for him. There was no doctor to be roused. We came back and we learned later that the man had died. It's a terrible thing. I have to wonder if he would have been more careful with the snake if my presence wasn't there, and I don't know. Okay, I am obsessed with masks. The performance form that I learned in Bali is one that where one performer uses a sequence of 10 or 12 masks in order to tell a story. Some of them are comic, some of them are serious, some of them are narrators, some of them are royal, some of them are clumsy clowns. And I enjoy wearing the various masks. But I also have an interest in the artistic integrity of masks and the kind of hybrid form of animate and inanimate that they create. And I'm fascinated by this life that they can take on where a human being is essentialized, is made, in a sense, more human than the human being itself. At least more clearly the kind of possibility within human nature that human presents. And so one of the things that drew me to Prahallada Nataka were the extraordinary masks that are made. And as we traveled around, we took photographs of, about 60, 65, maybe 70 of these masks. Some of them are more crude than others. Some of them are extremely refined. The oldest ones from the 1890s, and perhaps even before the tradition of Prahallada Nataka itself, were made of wood and are carefully preserved. Others are made of linen and paper mache and recycled more quickly. But I was amazed by the great variety that they showed. And some of them have a little comic aspect. Some of them are extraordinarily ferocious. They're not all of a kind. And they leave scope for the individual artist to make his commentary upon Narasimha. Simanchala Patra? Simanchala Patra. Simanchala Patra is one of the great performers of the world. Simanchala Patra, at the age of 55, was banging on the boards and strutting up and down the steps and yelling at his son and singing in that remarkable countertenor of his that you could hear for literally kilometers. I know this for a fact. I heard his voice once while I was out riding on my motor scooter, moving towards a performance, and there was his voice, just moving across the air and reaching my ears. I checked. I was a full 2 kilometers away. He was also remarkably generous with his time and just a very graceful, talented man. I have enormous respect for him. It's difficult to keep a form like Prahallada Nataka alive. It depends on a 12-year-old boy, 10 to 12-year-old boy, playing the lead role. And of course, children have to go to school now, and their parents have other ambitions for them. It depends on keeping a very large company intact, dealing with and sometimes improvising with a very complex text that includes Sanskrit and modes of singing which are not easy to learn. And so in talking to the various gurus, they thought it would be helpful to have a place where they could come together and share their concerns with the state government and with the National Sangeet Natak Academy. And working with Vishwavihari Kadanga in particular, but other gurus as well, Arjun Panigrahi and Kalya Kampo being 2 of the senior gurus, we were able to extend invitations to the companies. We thought that, maybe 30 or 40 people would come. My research assistant, who had been provided very gracefully by Sanjukta Panigrahi and Raghunath Panigrahi, and I went around from village to village and encouraged the people to come to this conference. Well, not 30 or 40, but 250 people showed up in Chhatrapur. They gave demonstrations, they argued intensely about the music, and they welcomed a troupe that was performing in Telugu as well as the troops performing in Odia. I'm told that contacts from that group have continued. Vishwabihari Kadanga, for example, later went down and talked with the Durgadas family in Srikakulam, in Ichapuram. And those contacts need to continue. The gurus need to work together. They were interested in setting up regional centers that would help sustain the art and allow them to pass knowledge back and forth. And I hope that those efforts continue, because they're important efforts. The form needs subsidy, it needs support, but more than anything else, it needs a show of interest. Sudha Mishra was the head of the Sangeet Natak Academy at the time the Chhatrapur conference was found. She took great interest in it. She interviewed a lot of the gurus. She took photographs, and I know that she tried mightily to set up support systems for these groups. Dhiren Dash was showing us around Odisha, he showed us not just Prahallada Nataka, but many other forms too, Buddhakatha and Harikatha, and it was quite remarkable, just the richness in Ganjam especially. The infrastructure was terrible at that time. People got caught in villages during the rains of the monsoon. Gurus could have trouble getting from one of their sites to another. But clearly, theater and narration and song were remarkably important to the identity of the people. We went into a tea house, and there was a man holding forth. He was an ekphati performance, I believe I have the right term. And he would make parodies, make satire based on all the different forms, all the different modes of narration, with accents, with proper use of raga and tala, with making puns and jokes. Of course, I didn't understand the language, but I understood the audience's reaction. And they would call out a form. They'd say, do kirtan, do harikatha, do some Prahallada Nataka. And he would immediately launch into a kind of satire of that form. And I thought, what a remarkable audience, what an extraordinary knowledge of the culture through performance. And I think that's what, more than anything else, made me want to come back to Odisha and spend more time here. On that first trip, with Dhiren Dash. Among other things, he showed us a pala performance and a form of daskatya. And it went out also and saw Desyanata. The performers were all remarkably skilled in their traditions. And I remember meeting them fondly, and we had to focus on something, and we eventually did focus on the Prahallada Nataka, in part at first because of the similarity I saw between the use of altered states of consciousness and the way in which space was used that reminded me so much of Balinese performance. When we came back to Odisha in 1982, one of the first places that Dhiren Dash took us was to Anugul, a small village named Kodasa. And there was a shadow puppet form there, a form of shadow puppetry that was supposedly dying out. We were told that there was one practitioner left. His name was Katinanda Das. And we saw him perform, and it was quite remarkable. The figures were unlike any of the other shadow puppet figures I've seen in India. They were opaque. They were about the size of the puppets used in Bali and Java, but of quite a different design. The puppet used for Ravana was, I think, quite extraordinarily beautiful. And Katinanda Das was giving a performance. We were able to see and then talk to us afterwards. And he's a joy to talk to. He's just full of his the devotional energy that at a very advanced age was still fueling his performance, and his joy in doing the shadow puppetry that he did. I'm told that, well, I know because I've seen at the Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts in Delhi and elsewhere, that the form did not die out, that he was able to pass his knowledge on to a younger generation. And I'm glad that that's the case.
निष्कलंक पुरुष अच्छे आउ को खोजले करो काम या छड़ाओ कहीं नहीं रनो मन खूब दृढ़ता सत्यता भिड़ आसी मनुष्यर सत्य तत्व अदृढ़ व्रत पार जेबे करी हेतु चेता घेनी सदेहर जीव तरी ये पीठ ब्रह्म गला बेले हेतु चेता धरिक नादबिंद चलो ये सहज
Jiwan Pani worked for the Sangeet Natak Academy for a long time. He was a very generous man. He had made documentary films himself about the shadow puppetry of all of India. And from Odisha, he knew the place very well and was very helpful in giving advice as to where we should go and what we should see. He himself has written a wonderful book about masks of India, and he includes in that the interesting term of the pliant mask, by which he means the extreme use of makeup in forms like Kathakali. I enjoyed his company a great deal. Another person who helped us in Delhi, or two other people. One was Kapila Vatsyayan, who I later worked with a great deal in setting up a collection of masks for the Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts, and who's a great repository of wisdom. And the other person I would want to mention is Sitakant Mahapatra in Delhi. Sitakant is himself from Odisha and had become a minister of culture, and he was very, very helpful. I was able to supply him with some photographs for his work, and he was able to give me some wonderful leads in terms of things I should pay attention to and things that were important in the field. One of the people who was helpful to us was Nabaghana Parida. He, as a child, played Prahallada and was involved in the Prahallada Nataka as a young performer. He's since become known as the foremost exponent of the Bharata Lila. And he is a funny, funny man on stage. He is a wonderful narrator. He has a wit, that could be the envy of any performer. But even not knowing the Odia language or knowing just very, very little of it, I can tell by the comic timing, by the phrasing, by the way in which he hands the dialogue over to the other performers and the way he takes it back and sustains the audience interests and his impeccable rhythms, that this is a master performer at work. Seraikela Chhau is a form that traveled in the 1930s, and it's based on a much older form of dance formed by the Paika troops. This foundation for the dance form is shared by the Mayarbhanj troupe, by the Seraikela troupe, and by the Purulia troops. But they've all taken very different paths. And the Seraikela troupe in the 1920s and 30s went through a radical change and began to emphasize in their performances a grace in performance that was influenced by the international modern dance movement. And they traveled to America, to Europe. They received great success, extraordinary press and praise, extraordinary praise in the press. And they came back. In that company was a local boy. It was a palace troupe. Most of the performers were royalty. But playing all the female parts was a boy from the village, a man named Kedarnath Sahu. Kedarnath Sahu was to go on to become the guru to the palace troupe. And when we filmed in 1980 and 1982, he was there leading the troupe and performing bits and parts and showing us the ways in which the martial arts tradition had been transformed into these remarkably graceful forms. One of the roles that he developed, that he invented, was that of Chandrabag, who is a maiden who is a devotee of the moon. And in this rather metaphysically invented new mythology that gets into the Seraikela Chhau, she is seen by Surya, the sun god, and Surya is smitten by her beauty. And Surya comes and tries to ravish her, basically tries to rape her. And she runs into the ocean and drowns herself. Surya, driven mad by his guilt and repentance for his deeds, spins out of orbit. And this is done in about an 8-minute dance. And it's a remarkable dance. And the portrayal of Chandrabhaga that Kedarnath Sahu invented as a boy is still talked about as the kind of pinnacle of grace and beauty in that form. One of the performances that Dhiren Dash took us to see was by a remarkable Pala performer, Bahinipati. And he clearly had full command of his genre. He was there with a chorus, he was telling a story, his narrative command of the story and the rhythmic and musical control he had over the form was evident. He's clearly a master performer. Hajari Bhand was an extraordinary court jester. He performed in the courts. His particular skill was putting on disguises. He performed after 1947, when the courts were basically disbanded, in the various towns of Mewar. He had a circuit of, he said, about 200 villages. He had costumes that he had sequestered in places along the route. He could do hundreds of roles. He gave us a demonstration once because of the intrusion of a madman in one of his performances, as to how he would work up an impression of that madman and turn it into a comic skit. And the way that his work went is he would come into a village and he would fool people into thinking that he was Gadolia singing, selling aphrodisiacs, or any one of a number of other performers. A Patan, for example, was one of his favorite roles. And people would at first be taken in, and then he would say, "I fooled you. And because I fooled you, you owe me something." And they would give him a little bit. And he would go around to the merchants of Mewar, and he would collect every year his bit for having been a good entertainer, having brought them customers. And he made his living this way. We made a film about him. It's called Jester Without a Court, Hajari Bhand of Rajasthan. And I recommend that you look at the film. It's available right now, but I'm going to make it more available. I'm going to put it on YouTube. Pratik Patnaik is an enterprising young man. And he got interested in my work. God knows how he heard about me. But I got an email about a year ago from this young man saying that people in Ganjam were mentioning that this crazy foreigner had come and taken a lot of film footage in 1982 and 1983 and again in the early 1990s of especially Prahallada Nataka, and he should look me up. Well, somehow he did. And he sent me an email. And he expressed interest in getting my footage shown on YouTube. I'm delighted he's doing that. I was wondering what in the world to do with all this footage. And it's going to become available. He's putting out some introductions to Prahallada Nataka using some of that footage and some of his own. We're getting a composite tape of about 10 minutes of the Prahallada Nataka as performed in 1982-83, before sound systems came in and were cranked up and everyone had to use mics, and important changes for good and for ill in the genre took place. And I'm delighted he's taking this interest in the cultural legacy that he has, and that he'll be passing it on to a wider public. One person who simply has to be mentioned is the person that rode on the back of a motorcycle to all-night performances all over the hills of Ganjam, who went to performances that never took place, who missed meals, who missed sleep, and kept me sane. And that's my wife, Ulrika, who goes by the name of Uli Emigh. And she was with me throughout 1982 and 83, up and down the coast of eastern India, and following Hajari Bhand as he made his manic progress through the villages of Mewar, pretending to be all manner of things, flagging down buses as a false policeman and demanding that he take his new assistant to, for example, a wedding that he was pretending to arrest people at. It was a godsend to have her with me, and God bless her.